Hey guys, welcome back to another episode here on the Semiconductor Podcast channel where you're going to find the best semiconductor news out there. What we're going to discuss today is pretty much going to do with the manufacturing aspect of the semiconductor industry. We've heard a lot of great news or recent news from companies like Amkor. We've also heard some reports from TSMC. So let's start off with today's episode. So first, let's start off with Amkor, ticker AMKR. So for those that are not familiar with Amkor, this is a company that does packaging and test and service for the semiconductor manufacturing phase. And for those that are not familiar, this is pretty much how the packaging goes in the supply line, right? You kind of have your semiconductor companies, you have your wafer manufacturing, then you have your packaging and test, which is where Amkor provides in, and then you finally have your final product and assembly. So Amkor right now is trading at $28.34. Year to date, the stock is doing decent. It's up about 11.27% with a market cap of roughly $7 billion. So there were reports or expectations that Amkor earlier this year was going to win customers from like NVIDIA for their advanced packaging solutions. But at the moment, it does seem like TSMC with their CoWoS advanced packaging is pretty much the only player to some extent to really be able to do it properly there. But obviously, there's other solutions that Amkor can win. So why I'm talking about Amkor is on recently on November 30th, they did announce that they are building a U.S. advanced packaging and test facility.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for the subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode.
So Amkor, a leading provider of semiconductor packaging and test service, has announced its plans to build an advanced packaging and test facility in Arizona. By the time of full project completion, Amkor projects to invest approximately $2 billion and employ approximately 2,000 people at the new facility. So obviously this bodes well, and it kind of just showcases how here in the semiconductor manufacturing, we're bringing a lot back to the United States, which does bode well. The other great thing is we are seeing a lot of manufacturing companies that deal with the actual wafer manufacturing coming to the United States or building or expanding here in the United States. We know Intel, for example. We know TSMC, for example. Samsung, for example. So the great thing is now a lot of this packaging usually happens overseas, but there are going to be some customers that want US only made chips to some extent. And obviously this helps create that reality because eventually you're going to be, hey, TSMC manufacture these chips to me here in the Arizona plant or here in the plant in the United States, and then send it over to Amkor where you can kind of finish a little bit of the advanced packaging and really have kind of a complete chip made here in the United States. So that obviously bodes well. They do mention that the first phase of the manufacturing plant is targeted to be ready for production within the next 2 or 3 years. And Amkor has worked closely with a very, very big company, Apple, on the strategic vision and initial manufacturing capabilities of this Arizona plant. And it's going to come from the chips produced by the nearby TSMC plant there in Arizona. So at the moment, they do mention when this facility opens, Apple will be its first and largest customer. And they also mentioned that, hey, around Arizona, you have a lot of semiconductor manufacturing companies that obviously can both and increase their overall customer rate. You have TSMC, like I mentioned, Intel, and they even talk about some other semiconductor players. They do mention that Amkor has been a strategic OSAT partner to TSMC for many years, and like I mentioned, Amkor, even though they are in the packaging and test, they don't have necessarily the complete advanced packaging for things like CoWoS that TSMC has, but that can kind of change over time and obviously can be a nice opportunity for Amkor in the future. So I just wanted to take a closer look at Amkor and how it normally trades. I wanted to look at its PE ratio really quickly, and we can see historically, I want to say Amkor trades in the below the 20s, maybe in the low teens, and that's where it's at right now. We can see for PE ratio forward is expected to grow up to 20. This kind of just showcases that, hey, the semiconductor manufacturing aspect is also seeing some form of headwinds. We're expected to kind of go up, but then if you look forward 1 year, which is next fiscal year, is expected to drop to 13.05, which doesn't necessarily seem like the worst case scenario here for Amkor. Personally, not one I'm investing in at the moment, but just wanted to take a closer look at PE ratios. Now, the second company I want to take a closer look at is TSMC. But before we go there, guys, I do want to say make sure to check out my semiconductor membership program. I am releasing 3 videos within the upcoming days where I talk about the semiconductor market. Right now, I did one that's on NVIDIA's investor key takeaways from recent conference events. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about the semiconductor industry. Like I mentioned, I am going to be releasing 3 videos these next few days. So hopefully everybody enjoys. Just click join to learn more about that. All right, so now if we take a closer look at TSMC, this is the largest manufacturing of semiconductor, especially advanced semiconductor chips. So right now, what we're seeing year to date, TSMC is killing it. It's up 33.2%. I do believe when this company sits at the low 90s or below 90, that's when it gets very, very attractive, in my opinion. And we've kind of seen that in the past few months or so. Right now, I'm not adding to TSM, but they do have some growth opportunities. All right, so with TSMC, I want to start off with this topic right here. So Snapdragon 8 Generation 4 is expected to be mass produced on TSMC's 3 nanometer N3E process. And why this is very important is before this, there were reports, there were rumors or speculations that Qualcomm was going to do maybe a duality, maybe do some chips in TSMC, maybe do some chips with Samsung. But it does seem like now things are heading that Snapdragon, their next generation 4 for Snapdragon 8, is going to be made under TSM. And I do believe this kind of just showcases that TSM is probably leading the way right now still in the 3 nanometer technology, something that Samsung definitely wanted to kind of be ahead of. There are other reports that kind of mesh with this, where TSMC is likely to win it all with Samsung's 3 nanometer reportedly losing several customers. One of those several customers, like we mentioned, was kind of Qualcomm at the moment, right? And the main reason it does seem like their 3 nanometer process has not met the percentage yields for orders, which obviously is kind of pushing customers to other players instead. It is important to note that Samsung's 3 nanometer is using the new gate all around process. So they might be ahead of that and they might see some weakness here, but it might be better in the upcoming generations as other players later on, like TSMC, is not doing gate all around into the 2 nanometer. So it's important to understand there is that difference there. Some other reports is Samsung continues to evolve its packaging capacity as well. And obviously, this is going to help them kind of maybe grab some GPU orders from NVIDIA as NVIDIA continues to kind of need improve its supply chain issues that it's seeing due to high demand. So Samsung is looking pretty interesting. Samsung is one that's traded over the counter right now. But I do want to say TSM, in my opinion, continues to show why it is the leader. So it's going to be pretty interesting when we finally see Intel enter this market, as we have heard that Intel is getting a lot of advanced packaging orders. And obviously, we're going to see how they do with Intel 20A, Intel 18A, and even Intel, their upcoming Intel 4 and Intel 3, right? So it's going to be pretty interesting to see this market get more competition. Now, some final news for TSMC is TSMC is expected to build a third chip plant in Japan. So TSMC, if you've kind of been following this channel, we've talked about how TSMC has been expanding in Japan. They kind of made their second plant there, pushing a second plant there, and even expanding. Originally, they were going to go with with I believe 5 nanometers. Now they're pushing it to like 4 nanometers, and now it seems like, hey, the new plant is going to push for even more advanced chips. So it does seem like Japan is becoming a really big semiconductor player at the moment, which bodes well for TSMC, and obviously it bodes well for a lot of semiconductor equipment companies. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Like I mentioned, today I wanted to take a closer look at more just the manufacturing aspect here in the semiconductor space, and a lot of great news here. So take care, have a good day, and see you next time.